Hello and welcome to the shop. Lately I've been doing quite a bit of work on my new Atlas lathe, and I hope to do much more work in the future. But what I'm finding is I have so many tools and attachments for this lathe, and they're laying all over the table. I'm having them roll off of the table. It's tough to find things because I'm having to dig through trays. So I decided to make a tool organizer for this lathe table. Now, I already started making the organizer before I realized, I probably ought to film this because somebody else out there might find it beneficial. So let me show you where I'm at so far. This is the shelf that I've made, and it has all of the various tools that I'm using on my lathe. Now, I do need to drill a few more holes, for things like Allen wrenches and chuck keys, things like that. But I figure I'll drill those once this is mounted on the back of the lathe. I'm going to put a back on this, and then I'm going to mount it to the back of my table, and I'll show you how that goes. All I've done so far is laid the tools out, and I ended up drilling 3/4 inch or 1/2 inch holes, depending on if it was a number 2 Morse taper or a number 1 Morse taper, and then a couple of smaller holes for these Tommy bars. But I'm really happy with how it's turning out so far. So let me take you along with the rest of the process. This is the shelf I just showed you minus the tools. What I've done is I've taken the backer board, which is a 1/2 inch thick, and I've drawn a light line all the way down the back of the shelf. Then I went and measured every 2 inches and put a dot that is centered from the edge of the board to that line. We're going to go now and drill holes and countersink them so that we can then attach this board to the backer board. A little light sanding to remove some of the burrs from the drilling process. I'm using a picture frame clamp to hold the boards together in the corner, and a couple of regular clamps because there was a slight bow in the backer board. Now what I'm going to do is pre-drill each of these holes along the back, and we'll go ahead and drive a screw in to hold everything together nice and tight. This may be a little awkward because of all the clamps, but using an 1/8 inch drill bit, I'm going to go ahead and pre-drill each of these holes into the backer board. I had to switch drills because the battery on my first drill was completely dead. Wasn't able to get that one because the clamps are in the way. We'll go ahead and set the other screws and we'll drill that hole at the very end of the process. I'm going to be using 1 5/8 inch coarse drywall screws to attach the top shelf to the backer board, and the main reason for this particular screw is because it just happens to be what I have in stock. We can probably go ahead and get rid of the clamps, which will make this a little easier to work with. This should make things a whole lot easier. Drill our final hole now. As you can see, my lathe table is quite messy. That's the primary reason I wanted to build this little organizer. Now I've scooted everything out of the way so I have room to work, and I've got my chuck. This is the chuck with the longest Morse taper, and what I want is, I don't want that to be wobbly. I want it to sit flat on the shelf. So I'm going to insert that into the shelf. I'm going to take the shelf and put it up against the back of the table until that touches. Then I'm going to raise it up just a hair. Now I'm going to put a mark on that shelf. I don't know how easily you'll be able to see that mark, but as you can see, I've probably got about 3/4 of an inch between this mark and the bottom of the shelf. So I'll flip this over, I'll put a mark at 3/4 of an inch all the way down the back of the shelf, and we'll go ahead just like we did with the top, and we'll mark and countersink holes all along the back so that we can attach this shelf to our table. I've got holes marked every 2 inches all the way down the back of my shelf, and I've put a couple of boards together so that I can lay the shelf flatly on my table. Now I want to go ahead and drill and countersink these holes all the way down the length of the board. With the holes drilled in my board, I think I'll go ahead and put the chuck back in. I'll set it down on the table to where the chuck is touching. Then we'll raise it up just a tiny bit. I'll force it into the corner over here, and we'll drill our first hole. Now with that hole drilled, I can go ahead, put a screw in there, then we can level the shelf at the other end and put the rest of our holes. I went ahead and put a screw in the first hole, and I let the tip of it just stick through on the back side. That should allow me to locate my hole on the table, and now we can go ahead and drive our screw in. Quick test, and we are above the table. That's exactly what I wanted. With the first screw in, we'll take a measurement from the top of my table to the top of my shelf, and it is 3 1/4 inches. We'll move to the other side and we'll raise the shelf to 3 1/4, and we'll quickly put a hole. I've started to screw in this end of the shelf. I'm going to raise the shelf to 3 1/4, and now we'll go ahead and set the screw. All that's left is to drill the remaining holes and set the screws. You can immediately see just how organized this makes the lathe table. Every tool has a spot. When I need it, it's within arm's reach, and when I take it out of the headstock or tailstock, I can very easily drop it back into its place, and I'll always know where it's at. I really hope you enjoyed this video. This was a super simple project that I made with a couple pieces of wood out of the old scrap bin and a few screws. It's nothing fancy, it's nothing earth-shattering, but it really did help me organize the lathe table, and I think it's going to make it much more convenient for every operation that I do on that lathe. Thank you for hanging out with me. I really hope you enjoyed this project. I want you to know that you are always welcome in my shop. Come back and see me again anytime. Take care. Have a great evening.